Today we're joined by Brent Wisner of the Wisner Baum legal team. The attorneys have been at the forefront of holding Monsanto, now Bayer, accountable for the harms caused by glyphosate. Through groundbreaking lawsuits, they've represented farmers, groundskeepers and everyday people whose lives have forever been changed by exposure to this chemical. In this conversation, we explore how such a chemical has been allowed into our food system and beyond. The fight for justice that has unfolded from courtrooms to policy debates, and what legal reform might mean for the future of agriculture, governance and public health. Brent, welcome. And
Hi.
Thank you so much for giving some of your precious time up to speak with us today.
Absolutely. It's an important topic, so happy to talk about it.
Yeah, we're excited to unpack this glyphosate agrochemical story with many different perspectives, but we all seem to come to the similar conclusions, of which I'll let listeners decide what they are, of course. I think before we dive into the meat, I'd love to hear a little bit from you about how did you become involved in this work? Like, what was it that drew you to these cases, and how's that kind of shifted your sense of justice, you could say?
Yeah, I mean, I think the truth of it is I grew up with this. I mean, my father, he actually worked with Cesar Chavez and helping agricultural workers in California who were being poisoned from pesticides. He'd actually had worked with them to help them develop ways to limit their exposure and work with medical professionals to detoxify and get these chemicals out of their system. These are largely people who don't vote. These are largely people who are on the margins of our society. And so my father did that when I was younger. And so I kind of grew up with companies like Monsanto being a bad name in the house. We ate all organic. I lived in Topanga Canyon, which anybody who knows the Los Angeles area is a hippie enclave, very naturalist kind of environment. And so I grew up with it. But the actual getting to be a lawyer suing Monsanto is a little bit more of an involved story because I wasn't supposed to be a plaintiff's lawyer, right? I went to a law school, Georgetown in DC, which doesn't make plaintiffs lawyers. It makes defense lawyers. And I was actually training to be a defense lawyer until my last year of law school. I basically said, what am I doing? I don't want to do this. And I ended up working for a federal judge in Hawaii for a couple of years. And my dad, of all people, said, hey, you should talk to this guy named Mike Baum. We knew each other back in the 70s. I won't disclose what they were doing back then, but I'm sure it was all sorts of getting into trouble. And you should meet him and see if you're interested. And that's what put me on this path to being an attorney working on this side of the V, or this side of, in my mind, justice.
Wow. So this is in your lineage, it's in your genetics. It's like you were born to be Brent Wisner now.
Well, I mean, the truth is, I don't know if it did my genetics, but I think there's a bit of predestination involved here. I think my father was so proud of me when I told him that I was taking on Monsanto. I mean, he was truly inspired. We're doing a little backstory. You can decide if you want to keep this or not. But I remember one of the most interesting moments of my life was my father knew this really prominent environmentalist named Thomas Lovejoy, who had worked with the Smithsonian and a bunch of other groups and organizations for decades trying to preserve the rainforest in Brazil. And my father had worked with him, and he was getting some big fancy award that had, in part, partially sponsored by companies like Monsanto. And so we go to this award, and I go to the table. My father it's just hit my dad and I. It's in DC, and he's getting, I don't know, drinks, or I don't know what he's doing, something. He's not at the table yet. And I sit down and I look around, and there's all these people in suits. And this is while I'm in law school, actually. And I said, hey, nice to meet you, Brent Wisner. What do you guys do? And they're like, oh, yeah, we all work. And they all one for one of them worked for Monsanto. And I said, oh, boy. Well, Heads up, when my dad gets here, this is going to be a really interesting dinner. And my dad did not hold back. It was one of the most awkward and kind of fun dinners I've ever been at in my life. Just overtly hostile. And we found out that Dr. Lovejoy intentionally put Michael and myself at that table to give, because the Monsanto had bought a table, so great, they contributed, whatever. But he was going to make them very unhappy with that dinner. So anyway.
They maybe didn't know quite what they were in for when they bought that table.
I think that's right. I think that's right.
It would have been an amazing, yeah, amazing to be a fly on the wall for that conversation.
Oh, I'll tell you, I was a bit awkward. I'm not gonna lie. I was like, oh my god, this is so overtly hostile. I was like trying to make peace. I was like, well, my dad, he's has some experience. I'm sure we're all here to celebrate Dr. Lovejoy. And my dad was like, I don't give a shit about Dr. Lovejoy. This company right here is killing people. And I'm like, oh gosh, okay.
Not another drink, thanks.
Yeah, pretty much.
Strap in. I think before we dive into the cases and that story, it'd be great to hear from you, because I'm sure there's a big story there that you can tell from your perspective. How did Monsanto and glyphosate come about? Like, or how did glyphosate come into, and the relationship between those two, that mega business and this ubiquitous chemical? Can you give us a bit of a backstory from your perspective on those two items?
Well, the history of glyphosate, to understand that you actually have to have the history of dioxin and its contamination in DDT, which was the first sort of major pesticide that had sort of proliferated in our agricultural system, at least in the US, and obviously was used in Agent Orange as part of the Vietnam War. But companies like Monsanto and some other ones as well had made a lot of money, convincing farmers that they didn't need to till anymore, that they could use chemicals to treat crops, which, for thousands and thousands of years was not really something that was how it was done. And the problem they ran into was that in the manufacturing process in the manufacturing process of making the pesticide, people who were working at the plants were getting very sick. They were developing all sorts of ailments, cancer included. And it ultimately became clear that there was this chemical, this contaminant, dioxin, that was in the pesticide that was causing these factory workers who were, putting the stuff together to get pretty sick. And it led to litigation and whatnot. And at that time, Monsanto decided they needed a new chemical. And actually, to be fair, we're coming to that crossroads right now for glyphosate. It's time for a new chemical. But they needed a new chemical. And they basically did what's called, it has a special type of name. I won't get into that. But essentially what they're doing is they're looking at chemical structures of chemicals, the way the atoms and the molecules are putting together, and they're looking to see how they will structurally impede the way plants take up nutrients. And that's ultimately where glyphosate emerged. It actually had been shown to be very effective at cleaning industrial boilers, but they started using it in the context of, okay, look at it structurally, and they saw, oh my gosh, this blocks a specific pathway in the plant for certain types of plants, largely found in weeds, that prevents it from being able to manufacture energy. So if you could block that pathway, you could basically cause it to starve to death. And that was the birth of glyphosate. And Monsanto, very early on, knew what they had. They had something that they could argue didn't affect humans because humans don't have that pathway. And they could then use it to kill all sorts of plants. And, they knew early on that they could mess with the genome of other plants to make it so they don't have that pathway, right? So you could create a soy product that doesn't use the shikimate pathway. And if you could do that, then glyphosate wouldn't kill it. And you would have glyphosate resistant crops. So you'd have the crops that could survive, and you'd have the herbicide to kill everything else, and you'd have a 1-2 punch that was unstoppable. And Monsanto, knew what it had early on and spent a lot of money and did some pretty shady things to make sure it got approved early on using a really corrupt laboratory out of Illinois. I can get into that if you want. But in any event, they knew what they had early on and they spent a lot of money to make sure it got approved.
We'll circle back to that new product later on in our conversation, because I think that's really important and really apt, because we know if one goes, there's going to be a new one that comes.
Yep.
And well, I'll unpack that a little bit later. I'm interested in, so this is the starting point of this chemical coming into our market. Mm-hmm. There was a lot of promises made about what this chemical can do. It can help feed the world. It's completely safe, all that story. But initially, you saw and have been able to uncover corruption at that point. We're not talking about when those stories even. Can you unpack that just in a little bit for our audience, because I know this is information that I don't even know.
Sure. I mean, there's a lot of story there, but probably the most brazen one, the one that makes people's jaw drop when they hear this, is the direct fraud that was done. And this isn't me, this is the federal government. People went to jail for it. So there was this group called IVT Laboratories in Illinois, and they were an industrial lab. So basically, if you wanted to prove that your chemical was safe, you would run animal studies, usually rats or mice, and show, hey, look, it doesn't cause cancer, or it doesn't cause tumors, or whatever it is that you're trying to prove the safety of it. And glyphosate, back in the 70s, needed to show that. And so they went to IVT Laboratories. Just before glyphosate was studied by IVT Laboratories, a guy named Paul Wright, who worked at Monsanto, he was big top guy in toxicology, leaves Monsanto and joins IVT Laboratories. Okay? He's at IVT Laboratories for about 2.5, 3 years. And then that's exactly the time period where glyphosate was studied and shown to have absolutely no carcinogenic effect. And then Paul Wright went back to Monsanto. He went back to the company. Okay. Coincidence? Maybe. All right. The problem was, about 5 years later, the federal government raided IVT Laboratories and found out that the place was a complete and utter fabrication. All of the data was made up. These animals were literally sitting in dead pools of water. Like, there was no science going on. It was just a pay-for fake science certification. Paul Wright was specifically indicted. He specifically went to jail. He was convicted of fraud. Monsanto paid for his multi-million-dollar defense. But of course, Monsanto was never touched. And so the studies that formed the basis of glyphosate's approval were deemed to be invalid by the EPA. And so the first 10 to 12 years, this molecule is being used and approved, despite the fact that we know it was based on fraud. We know that for a fact. So the next step happens is they say, well, okay, Monsanto, we're not going to make you take it off the market because, why would we do that? That's our government for you. They don't take it off the market. They say, okay, do a study and show us that it's safe. So they do a study, and the study shows that it causes cancer in animals. That's what the next study shows when they actually do it. They send it to the EPA. The EPA says, oh yeah, this is probably carcinogenic, and they decide that. That's what they rule. And Monsanto goes, oh my God, hold on. We got to fix it. So they hire this fancy expert who comes in. He looks at the data, and he finds an additional tumor. No one else had seen this. He finds something, we call it the magic tumor, in the control group. And because you have a certain number of people exposed to animals with tumors in the exposed group and a certain number in the control, you just add one to the control. Now it's no longer statistically significant, and now it's no longer a positive study. And we know this was all a part of a racket because Monsanto, quite literally in its emails, said, we're hiring this guy to find us a tumor. I mean, that's what they said. And he found it. And that's actually the first 20 years of glyphosate's regulatory history. The EPA fought back and forth on this with them for decades until finally they just gave up and they let it be sold for decades. So.
Wow. I'll just let that sink in a little bit, um, for listeners who, yeah, this is probably new information for a lot of people. Um, so let's move to the courtroom, maybe.
Sure.
And I know that's where there's been quite a few people that I'll be speaking to that I said we'll be having this conversation, and they were like, "Oh my God, he's a force of nature." So referring to you, and that was obviously in a good way. Um,
Sure. Sure.
and if listeners are tuning in, there's a wonderful documentary called Into the Weeds that features you quite a bit about the penultimate case that is documented during that. And I'd love to unpack a little bit around. You've obviously represented a lot of people that have suffered because of exposure to this chemical.
Hmm.
Um, can you give us a bit of an understanding of what that exposure has led to for those people, and then what has happened in the courtroom when you've got juries that are listening to this and probably learning a lot as they listen, because they've probably used Roundup at home,
Yeah.
as we all have sometime in our lives. That it must be quite like the evidence must be formidable, right? That this is causing harm. So I'd love to just maybe just get a sense of of what happened in those courtrooms. Who were those people that were being affected, and some of those beautiful outcomes that you've seen in
Yeah.
justice?
It's interesting because much of our job, my job at least, is picking up the pieces after people's lives are largely destroyed, right? You don't usually hire a lawyer until you've been hurt. And the injury here is cancer and death. And so, I always make a comment to people that my job is a side effect of a failed regulatory body, right? If the government's doing its job right, products are safe and people don't get hurt, or at least the hurt is minimal. But when I get involved is when they have failed us. And the Roundup case in Monsanto, it actually came to us from a family friend. So one of the people who worked at my firm, her uncle sprayed Roundup all the time in Cambria, California, and uh, he was spraying it all the time. His beautiful dog was between the orchard and this avocado orchard, and he developed lymphoma and he died 3 months later. And the case was brought to our firm because she's a friend. She's a friend of the family. Hey, Brent, is there anything here? And I got this long email and I looked at pictures of this guy and what they'd been through, and I realized that this was a case that kind of was important. And I had wanted to sue Monsanto for a long time, so it kind of fit my ethics, my morality at least. And Michael Baum and I did some research, and IARC, the International Agency for Research on Cancer, had just declared glyphosate was a probable human carcinogen. Pretty big deal. And it seemed like the right time to see if we could make it work. But the litigation process is systematically built against plaintiffs. I know people think, oh, they see these big verdicts and these big results that people can get. That's actually the very rare occurrence. The vast majority of the time, courts are killing cases, right? We have to prove everything. And if I can't prove it, but I think it's right, that's not enough, right? I have to have the best experts. I have to have millions and millions and millions of dollars to prosecute this on every front when Monsanto has an unlimited budget. It is a difficult thing to do. We're supposed to lose. And nowhere was that more acute and I think more obvious than in the first case that went to trial. I mean, Mike Miller, who was an attorney out of Virginia, seasoned trial lawyer, had pushed this case, Lee Johnson, his case to trial. Lee was dying of this really aggressive form of lymphoma that appears in your skin. He's actually in the Into the Weeds documentary, and he had pressed the case of trial. It was the first case going to trial. And 2 weeks before the trial, Mike Miller is in a kiteboarding accident. He he goes 30 miles per hour into a pier because his safety clip doesn't work for some reason. And he's in the hospital. And this guy's a 70-year-old kite surfing, so God bless him. I hope I'm kite surfing when I'm 70. But he was a maniac, and he survived, but he was severely injured and in the hospital, barely lived. His number two was a guy named Tim. He was sort of my contemporary. He calls me up literally that Sunday night leaving the hospital and says, "Hey, Brent, Mike's hurt." And I'm like, "Oh my God." And he's like, "Yeah, I know. We got this trial starting in 2 weeks. We can't move it. The guy's dying. Do you want to come try this case with me?" And I said, "Of course I do. I'm in. This is the case that I was meant to try." And he says, "Great. Let's get on a call tomorrow morning." We jumped on the call. On the call, within the first 5 minutes, he collapses and has a grand mal seizure and has a head injury. And he's out for the count. And so the third guy at the Miller firm, this guy named Dave Dickens, comes to me and says, "All right, Brent, we're trying this case." And I said, "All right." And he goes, "Well, Brent, I have to ask you a question." And I said, "What's that?" He goes, "What's glyphosate?" And I went, "Oh boy." I said, "David, let me try this case. Just let me take the lead." And he says, "It's all yours, man. Have at it." So that's why I was a 34-year-old kid who was trying probably one of the most important cases in recent legal history, at least in this area that I practice in. And everyone, Monsanto, the press, everyone thought we were going to get clobbered. And maybe I did too a little bit, if I was being honest with myself. I said, "Well, let's go punch up that rock wall as hard as we can and see what happens." And that's kind of how it started, But yeah,
It seems as if it probably was to the case's advantage that it had a 34-year-old with some energy and some drive and maybe some naivete into what he was getting into, right? Because it's like the David and Goliath story somewhat.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't realize just how outgunned I was walking. I walked into a gunfight with a toothpick, and I thought, I can make this work. And I just had the confidence and naivety, as you said, to think I could win. But it was interesting. The one thing that I had that I think really few people in that courtroom, including the defendants, Monsanto's lawyers, had, was I just had well. I'm not going to speak ill of the defense lawyers. Monsanto, I'll speak ill of, but the lawyers, we tend to be. They were good lawyers. I'm not going to say they're doing their jobs, But I'll tell you, I knew the science, right? I knew the studies. I knew what the data showed, and I knew it cold. And there was very few people who could even come close to my comprehensive and detailed knowledge of this area. And I made the case about science. My opening statement was 3.5 hours long. I went through every study. I went through every tumor, every mutation, and I went through everything. I talked about, there's these studies out of, South America where they were spraying villagers who, as part of cocaine eradication. And they would go and they'd have to get sprayed with Roundup. They'd test their blood and they'd see all this severe genetic damage and the exact types of genetic damage that would lead to lymphoma. I mean, I went through all of it with my jury, and I'll tell you, I had a jury that was really smart. I had, I think, 2 PhDs on my jury. I think everybody but 2 people had gone to college, multiple masters. We had a lawyer, and one of the PhDs was a molecular biologist. She literally worked for a pharmaceutical company, creating genetically modified organisms to make new drugs. Now, full disclosure, it was a nonprofit pharmaceutical company that was trying to create free drugs for the world to treat diseases. So she was obviously a really awesome drug company person. But, and I made it as complicated as I could, and I got into the science, and the jury, they got it. And ultimately when they, deliberated, they heard our case. And I mean, I can get into the details. We could be here all day, but every day it was one huge, impossible thing to overcome that we somehow, and every day we left the court saying, well, we haven't lost yet, so we must be winning, right? That was kind of our our philosophy. And when it all got said and done, we got into that room, and the jury gave us a $289 million verdict. And and I remember, I mean, I was bawling. Lee Johnson, my client, he was bawling. The court reporter, she was bawling. And I remember looking over to the jury, and I saw 3 or 4 of the jurors. They were crying. And I said, thank you. Like, you can't talk, but I was mouthing it. And they said, no, thank you. And I started crying more. And then afterwards, we all went back into the room, and they got to meet Lee Johnson, and we talked to them for a while. And, they told us what they thought of everything. And it was really powerful. We took a picture together and hug. And for years, that jury would get together every couple of months and just reconnect, because it was an important experience for them as jurors, just as it was obviously for us as lawyers and for the case. And why I said no one thought we were going to win is because what happened the next day, right? The next day, Bayer stock, who had purchased Monsanto, by the way, they had purchased them in the middle of the trial. That the deal went through in the middle of the trial. Their capitalization dropped out $30 billion in one day, because people went, Monsanto was never supposed to lose. If they lose this, they can lose all. Oh my God, this company is done. And that's when the investors freaked out. And honestly, they've never really fully recovered. I mean, there's been a lot of verdicts afterwards. There's obviously been a lot of settlements. But that litigation is really the first public execution of an untouchable institution like Monsanto that had until then run roughshod over every attorney that really tried to do anything to them, and done so very successfully. So it was a turning point in a lot of ways, not only from litigation, but I think also from a societal perspective of this pesticide that was supposed to be safe as table salt. Maybe it wasn't. Maybe there's something that this EPA has gotten wrong, because this jury sure as heck agreed. And the more you dig into it, the more you look into it, you realize it wasn't just me, playing on their emotions, or me, doing like dramatic lawyer things. It was the actual science. I mean, if you pull up the actual opening statement or the closing arguments and you watch them, some of them are on YouTube, they might actually be available. You'll see it's highly technical. Like, I'm spending more time talking about science than anything else. This was not I mean, sure, there's some emotion involved. There's a human being, but that's not what was driving it. What was driving it is the hard, cold reality of evidence and truth. It's pretty powerful.
Super powerful. I think this set a really big precedence on many levels. You spoke about the societal one. It was like, well, can we trust these companies, and can we even trust our regulatory agencies that are there to protect us? Yeah. But it also set a precedent around and I'd love you to give us an understanding of, you would have been inundated with calls possibly, like, and because this thing's everywhere, and a lot of people are exposed to it. So for people to get an understanding of the breadth of harm, it'd be great for you to speak to that, because I know here in Australia, there's been, class actions put forward, Morris Blackburn, I think, and another one of our law companies. They haven't got to where you got to, but there's an energy around this where justice wants to be brought forward, and you guys got it. I think what you did was allow what justice, or gave us a sense of what justice feels like, and maybe that jury what justice feels like, and what that feels like now. So what happened post that decision?
Well, I mean, a lot of things have happened. Obviously, we ultimately reached a lot of settlements for people who got cancer, and they got some money from Monsanto and Bayer to compensate them. There's been, I mean, I've testified in Parliament and EU. I've worked with regulators. Bayer has taken glyphosate off of the residential market altogether because of the exposure and liability. But one of the things that I think is so alarming, I put aside a second, these cases were about glyphosate causing cancer, right? And we chose that that case because we could prove it, right? We have the studies, we have the evidence, we have the goods on that. But there are dozens of other issues associated with glyphosate that we probably could prove, but the evidence just isn't as strong. But it doesn't mean it's safe. It's really a disturbing fact that this pesticide, glyphosate, has been sprayed more in the world than every other pesticide combined ever. I mean, we're talking about it's everywhere. You could eat organic, it's in your organic food. You can drink purified water, it's in your water. It's in everyone's body right now. It's everywhere. And I'll tell you, it's really hard to prove that something hurts people when you don't have a comparator group that's unexposed. Who do you compare it to? Everyone's exposed. So all we can show is the most extreme injuries, right? Where it's greater exposed is associated with a specific injury. But we look around and we have so many sicknesses and so many ailments that we don't understand. Things that are emerging that we can't explain. Is it glyphosate? Well, I can't say that. I can't prove that. But gosh, you have to wonder what happens when you systematically expose every person on this planet to this. I mean, I'd love to compare, maybe we find some indigenous group of people on some remote island somewhere that's never been exposed to anything, and we could use them as a comparator. But it's tough. It's a really a tough thing, and it's kind of this form of pollution and poisoning that you can get away with the greatest crime so long as you poison everybody. And Monsanto has done that. And our regulators have let them do it. And we are just sitting by side, just watching it happen. And I've seen studies about epigenetic effects of glyphosate that scare the crap out of me. Because what it says is the injuries that you're going to see, the really bad ones, you won't see for a few generations. So our children and their children, they're going to see outcomes that, we'll be dead. We won't even know. And that's going to happen. And I really worry for the future of our world because we've let this happen. And our cavalier attitude to the exposure of this chemical whose sole purpose is to interfere with the way things live and allow it to be in everything. It's really disturbing.
Yeah, that's why we're here. That's why we're having this conversation, right?
Yeah.
And we're just talking about glyphosate. There's a suite of chemicals that get utilized in our food system, and I don't want to even imagine what happens when they become this toxic cocktail. And we see it all around us. We are in a state of disease, and our food and the way we grow our food has a huge impact not only on our personal health but our landscape health, our landscape function, our ecosystem health.
Yeah.
It's a time for reflection for humanity. How did we get here, and what the hell are we going to do about it? So I think that opens up some questions to you, because I know you probably have given it some thought.
Yeah.
What do we do? How do we rein this in, and what can we do is it policy? Is it society? Is it regulatory? Like how do we activate ourselves and our governments to start to take responsibility and be held accountable for the decisions they make, because they're meant to be there to protect us, right?
Yeah, I mean that's the purpose supposedly, although it often seems like they're there to service companies, but maybe that's the cynical part in me coming out. You asked me like, what can we do about it? And depending on the day, you're going to get different answers from me. Some days it feels like it doesn't matter what we do. Like it's sort of like it's sort of my the most pessimistic I can get, whether it be like, for example, global warming, right? If we stopped burning every fossil fuel everywhere around the world today, right now, take 200 years before we got to baseline. I mean, is it too late? I don't know. And I get the feeling about glyphosate and some of these agrochemicals. Is it too late? It's everywhere. It's in everything. Is it too late? So my most cynical part of me says, I don't know. Maybe because of the short duration of human sight that we can only think within with a generation or two, that we can't plan for these sinister effects, these external costs of exposing a population to chemicals that happen over the course of hundreds of years. And maybe it's the way we go extinct as a species. So that's my most dark view of it. Most of the time I'm not that dark. Mostly I'm usually actually a pretty optimistic guy. And I think fundamentally it comes with two big ideas, right? I mean, the first is I think people need to question and really ask themselves if, because a government says that a chemical is safe, does that mean it's safe? I think we owe it to ourselves and our family to question that. And I'm not saying we need to say it's not true, and we should definitely follow science. But I think the assumption that the FDA, EPA, or whatever equivalent you have in another country is on our side is a profoundly dumb thing to believe, because we have consistently seen them fail us for generations, and it would be absurd to think, oh, well, they're just right every time. They're wrong a lot of the time, although they are right some of the time. So I'm not saying they're always wrong, but we have to be careful. And I think the second thing is I think we really need to talk about the importance of farming in our society. I mean, if we are going to insist that 0.0001% of our population works in agriculture, right? Then we cannot feed ourselves unless we use chemicals, unless we use shortcuts. There's just no way to do it, right? Because if you are not going to use chemicals, then you need to put some more elbow grease and pull the weeds or whatever it is that you will need to do for whatever crop you're raising. And I think, with the turn of the Industrial Revolution and the industrialization and modernization, even in the digital age we're living in, farming is frowned upon. It's relegated to people who've been doing it their whole life and don't know any better, and it's relegated to the weirdos who do it on their house because they're very careful and they have their own gardens. And they're not weirdos, and it's not a job that should be relegated. That those viewpoints are the problem. And society and as a culture, we need to admire, financially reward, and expect better from our farming. And you see this in certain countries. Certain countries, farming is a pride and joy. The people who farm are the people who have made it in the world and are doing the greatest job in the world because they're outside and they're living the pastoral life. Like, there are countries and cultures that value that. The United States sure as heck not one of them. And it's a mistake. And so what do you get? You get crap, cheap food, you get industrialized agriculture, and you get sick people. Now, there's no incentive to fix it because, well, if you get sick people, then you can make drugs to fix the sick people, and you can get in this endless loop of making money. But the expense, the price that's paid is our human health, and the price we pay is the quality of life that's lost along the way. And so my less cynical, although it seems pretty cynical view, is that we need to value farming. We need to put priority into that, and we have to accept that might mean you pay more than $1.25 for a meal, that you actually have to pay a few extra bucks to get quality food. And maybe we could afford it if we paid less for healthcare and the drugs that we all have to take to stay alive, etc., which I think there's a way through that. And I think I really think to do that, you need to have a cultural shift. And the problem is, like here in the US, Bobby Kennedy, who's, running HHS, he has this viewpoint, but he ain't gonna get anything done. It's too political, right? As soon as Trump is mentioned, I don't care whether you're on one side or the other, you're gonna get political. It doesn't happen. And so the politicalization of that is not helping the situation when really this should just not be a political issue. This is just a human issue. So
I totally agree. This is a human issue, and I think what sits behind it all is our disconnection from our food.
yeah,
Like we are we treat food as a convenience. Food should be sacred. Food is what nourishes us, and our relationship is so backward around it, and therefore we don't revere farmers. We think of agriculture in bizarre terms when it should be lifted up and supported. Because what agriculture, the effect it has on our landscapes and our ecosystems is massive,
Oh my
and the
God.
effect it has on our health is key and vital.
Yeah.
What happened? How did we? And I think that's part of the bigger story that's been told and unpacked by possibly large global interests in the disconnect the people from their food, and we can tell them what to eat, when to eat, and how to eat.
Hmm.
And the byproduct of that is what we're seeing right now. But what I do know is that we have a huge potential to heal,
Yeah.
and so does the earth. So if we come back and bring that relationship back, I think there's great possibility for us as a species.
I think another thing that could be really effective, and I've observed this just anecdotally. I'd love to see a study on it. Is teaching agriculture and food science as part of the mainstay curriculum. You know that we have PE, we have biology. Well, we should have kids in school go to a farm and learn how crops are made, see an animal get slaughtered. I mean, it's really important to see it. A lot of people see that and they go, I don't want to eat meat anymore. Like, I don't, whoa. It's one thing when it looks like a hamburger. It's another thing when I see this cute little, cow, what they go through. And I eat meat, but I've seen it. I do it with my eyes open. I know the situation. And I guess my point is the more people are educated about it, the more they realize just how important it is. And I think when you see what goes into making a loaf of bread, like you go, wow, how could I ever expect this to be $1? Right? There's so much that goes into this piece of bread being here, from not only just even the making of it, let alone the growing of the crops to get it there. And yet I expect, because you're right, you're disconnected from it, right? It's otherworldly. I open up this package and there's food in it, and I don't care how it got there, and so you don't have to think about it.
Mm-hmm. Was it Wendell Berry that wrote, we have a healthcare system that doesn't consider food, and we have a food industry that doesn't consider health. He said it in much more beautiful terms, of course.
Yeah, I think that's exactly correct. And the question you need to ask yourself, is that by accident?
No.
No. I mean,
Design.
you think it's an accident that Bayer, a pharmaceutical company that makes products to treat cancer and other physical ailments, is also a pesticide, one of the biggest bioag companies in the world? You think that's an accident? I mean,
It's a good
it
business
doesn't.
model.
Yeah, it makes sense. Hey, let's get in on both sides of the spiral, the dwindling spiral, I should say.
I want to circle back to, like, if we get our way, and it is happening, like glyphosate is being taken off shelves, and that's not because they probably want to do that. It's because they see they need to do that. So what happens then? Like, what do you see happening? Because I can imagine what's happening. We're going to see a new product that does the same thing, because we've built a farming system that is so reliant on these chemicals to get what they need economically out of it. So what happens, and what is it that comes in and replaces it? Is there going to be proper regulatory testing around that? I'd love for you to enlighten us a little on what you understand is coming through.
I think there's two glimmers of hope moving forward that I think are really interesting. The first is, it's getting easier for people like me to do my job than it is for people like Monsanto to hide evidence. So, back in the day, you'd get a truck of documents, of paper, fill up a warehouse. You have to figure out the diamond in the rough. Now I can go through 5 million documents in a couple of seconds, right? I can leverage AI and technology to do things that people couldn't do 50 years ago. And in some ways, and with the permanence of electronic information, the fluidity of it, it's almost impossible to hide anything in a corporation anymore. And so I think what that means is that there's a lot of increasing concern about getting away with it. It's harder to commit murder today than it was 50 years ago because technology makes it really hard. A good example of this is you look at airplanes. I mean, you probably remember there was a time when airplane crashes were not infrequent. I mean, you'd hear about 10 or 20 a year, right? And it was like, well, it's still 1 out of a million, so it's very rare, but it happened pretty frequently. Nowadays, there's basically unheard of. I mean, you hear 1 a year maybe, and usually it's some freak accident, crazy thing, or some beginnings of the episode of the show Lost or something, right? It doesn't happen anymore. And I know this because my firm, before I got joined, was heavy into airplane crashes. We sued the crap out of airlines for years. And that business is dried up completely. We don't really have lawsuits anymore because there's no more plane crashes. And so sometimes lawsuits and sometimes forcing the awareness catches up. I think the other glimmer of hope, and so maybe here, when it comes to the next chemical, they're going to think twice, and I think they have to. I think Bayer, who's literally the biggest bioagricultural company in the world, who is literally facing an existential threat from Roundup, just one pesticide, right, has to consider that. I mean, they have a fiduciary obligation to their shareholders to do it, so the incentives are aligned there. I think the second glimmer of hope is we are so much better able to understand the consequences of chemicals and their effects on the body without ever having to actually experiment, right? We have computer models now that allow us to see problems before we actually see them in humans, before they're approved. And there's some really cool technology, and to their credit, Bayer has invested heavily in this, right? Where they're using AI in the absence of, poisoning poor monkeys and rabbits and whatnot, like actually studying it from a computer conceptual, and you're able to say, okay, this has the same problem as these 50 other chemicals. And so while you're right, things repeat themselves. I mean, that is the course of human history. They're repeating themselves, but it's getting better. And the question that's going to define not only this generation, but our species as a whole is, can we learn faster than we can destroy ourselves? And that's the fundamental, philosophical question. And I think we will. I if I'm going to bet any money, I'm going to bet it on us figuring it out. Notwithstanding the horrible corporations that are just trying to make money along the way. But if we can make it too expensive, they'll figure it out too. So
it's kind of part of human nature, the unfortunate part of human nature, and I've learned this personally, and I think we see it collectively, is that change doesn't seem to come until there's some kind of cataclysm, until it gets so fucking, excuse my language, hard. That it's like, okay, I see it on landscapes with farming communities, and a dilapidated landscape. It's like, I've got to change, or my health is shot. I've got to do something different. Like, are we at that point, civilizationally or collectively, that we need to change and things need to move in a better way?
Yeah, but I will say, you just have to ring the bell a few times, right? And people see truth when it's in front of them. You know what I mean? And like, you get a big verdict, and you bring glyphosate to the human consciousness. Oh my gosh! But here's the thing, right? People don't know this. There were glyphosate lawsuits decades ago. They were settled and buried. Nobody rang the bell. No one release the documents like the Monsanto papers like we did, right? They just took the money and then went on their merry way, and no one had anything to say about it. And I think that's what I'm saying. You just have to ring the bell a couple times, and people wake up pretty quickly. Now, when I say wake up, is everyone going to be on board? No, you're going to. I was talking to a reporter just, what is it, 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, maybe. And he was like, "Hey, Brent, nice to meet you." He's like, "It's funny. I wanted to reach out to you because I was talking to a farmer and he had your photograph. I was in a Zoom and I could see his photograph of you, a picture of you on his wall behind him." And I said, "Oh, really? Is he someone who believes in, holding corporate?" He's like, "Oh, no, no, no. It was motivation, because I was the villain. I was the person. I was the
You
person.
were on a dartboard.
I was taking away his chemicals and he couldn't stand it." But you know what? Even that person is awake. Maybe they're deluded, but they're awake. And it's those people and the people who are actively trying to make things better who are motivated. I think where you run into problems is when everyone falls asleep, right? When you go back to basically the 80s and the 90s in this area, and people were just cruising, oh, McDonald's is now really cheap. That's great. We're not going to ask why suddenly the food is so inexpensive and where it's coming from. We're just going to ride that wave. And I think people are waking up. I think there is so much more consciousness about it. I think the lawsuits help with that. And I think groups of people who are ringing bells are waking people up. And I think social media to some extent is helping. I really do. I think the fact that you can do a podcast and maybe millions of people hear it, and you can do it in off of your iPhone is kind of powerful, right? Freedom of speech has more reach than it ever did before in a way that just didn't exist 20 years ago even. So
Yeah, we have all this amazing connectivity and technology at our whim. We just need to use it for good.
yeah, well, that's true. And a lot of it ain't. So
true. So that comes back to people using their discernment.
yeah.
And questioning things.
Yeah.
So I want to just touch on, you mentioned it before, and I'm sure there's a lot of people that aren't even aware of what they might have heard of it, but they don't really know what it is. What are the Monsanto papers?
So back in 2017, we were in the middle of pretty heavy litigation. It's before any trials or anything. And I was sitting there watching these news stories come out, just one after the other, ripping me apart, me and my fellow lawyers apart, basically saying we are charlatans, we are trying to destroy food security, there's no science, this is just, we need to do tort reform, we got to prevent loss, all that stuff. The U.S. Chamber of Commerce parading us around as, you've heard of the hot coffee story in the United States, and it's a famous example of tort reform. Ironically so, because if you actually find out what happened, it was actually a legitimately good case, but putting it aside. So there was all this stuff happening in 2017, and it pissed me off. Not only did I know that those stories were being planted by Monsanto, I had the emails. I was staring at them. I was watching Monsanto feed whole written stories to very prominent reporters who would just publish them sight unseen. It was a farce. But I couldn't say anything because the document was confidential and it was sealed. And all the discovery and all the salacious emails, all the criminal conduct that I could see happening in these emails and in these discussions and in these memos were sealed. I couldn't share them with anybody. And so Monsanto was allowed to go out there and rail against us, and I couldn't respond by saying, it's not true, and I can prove it one day when I show you. What is that, right? And so I had this idea. I said, let's get them released. Let's get the documents, all of them. We put together about 200-300 of the most salacious, on point, exposing of the fraud and the nonsense. And those what have become known as the Monsanto papers. But here was the problem. I was legally prohibited from sharing it with anybody. So I dug down into the rules and the order, and I found these couple of sentences in the rules. It said I could challenge the confidentiality of the document. And if I did so, Monsanto would have to meet with me. And if we couldn't agree on unsealing it, they would have to file a motion with this judge to seal them. And if they did not file that motion within 30 days, it was, quote, automatically waived. That's what the language was. So I put together this whole monstrosity of a document, put them all together, sent them to Monsanto, said, all right, let's meet and confer. Let's go through this. We sat down. They sat down with all the documents. And I said, all right, let's go through them one at a time. And they said, Brent, we're not doing that. We are going to tell you that you need to go away. And I said, excuse me, no, you have to talk with me. They said, no, go away. I said, can I quote you on that? They said, yes. And I said, okay, great. We've not reached agreement. Goodbye. So I waited. I waited 30 days. They never filed a motion. I waited 31 days because I was worried that I had gotten miscalendared it or no motion. At midnight on the 31st day, I emailed every one of those documents to the New York Times. I sent them to every member of the European Parliament, the Department of Justice, the California EPA. I posted every one on my website. I sent them to investigative journalists that I knew were working on this. I sent it to everybody. And in every one of those emails and letters, I copied Monsanto. So I mean, I was not hiding what I did. You didn't file it, here you go. And Monsanto went psycho. I mean, that's just what they went ballistic. They filed this motion to the judge, basically saying I need to be removed from the case, and everybody who ever worked with me needs to be removed. The other lawyers should have been properly supervising me. They should be removed. They were seeking a complete annihilation of the case. And obviously all the lawyers who didn't have any idea that I was doing all this freaked out and said, we didn't know. Punish him, not me. And they all threw me under the bus, but they distanced themselves. And I went to court, and the judge called. We had a phone call 2 weeks before, and he said, all right, I read Monsanto's papers, and I haven't had a chance to read yours yet, Mr. Wisner, but I just want you to know it's pretty clear to me that you acted in bad faith. So you're going to come up here in 2 weeks, and you're going to have to explain to me why I don't grant all the relief that Monsanto wants and kick you off this case and sanction you. And I'm like, oh, cool. I'm like 32 years old, 33 years old. Like, okay. So I go up there 2 weeks later. And I remember walking into this courtroom, and it was packed. I mean, this is a huge courtroom, probably 200 people, all there to watch my execution. Like just pure spectatorship. This is like the equivalent of a legal like undressing of a lawyer. And no one really cared about me. I think they just wanted to see how bloody it got. And the judge that we were in front of was not known to pull punches. He was a pretty rough guy. And I hired this lawyer, this fancy lawyer to defend me. And it's like this, like my trial. This is my career in this moment. I get up there, and the judge asked my lawyer the question, the very first question we knew the judge was going to ask. And I had practiced his answer repeatedly before this hearing. And my lawyer proceeds to just not give the answer. He decides to start going off on random tangents. He doesn't answer the judge's question. The judge gets pissed. I mean, really, really pissed. Finally, I stand up and say, Your Honor, can I just respond to your question? And he's like, yes, I want to hear from Mr. Wisner. And my lawyer's like, no, sit down, Mr. Wisner. And he's trying to stop me. And the judge is like, sit down, sir, or I'm putting you in jail. So my lawyer sat down. And so this is my defense. My lawyer had pissed off the judge so much that he had been threatened to go to jail. And this is the beginning of my defense. And basically, I answer the judge's question. He goes, that's the problem, Mr. Wisner. You were so interested in being a PR man, you forgot what it meant to be a lawyer. And this litigation needs lawyers, not PR men. That's what he said to me. And I lose it. I went off. I did not hold back. I told the judge, if you think I'm doing this for PR, then you don't know how to practice law. You think I'm doing this? I ripped into the judge, and I told him that I've been doing this since I was a kid, that my father marched with Cesar Chavez. This is about protecting people who are being poisoned, and that these documents show corporate malfeasance, and I don't care what the court says. And I laid it all out. And I was shouting. I mean, you don't shout at a federal judge. I'm telling you, that's usually a bad strategy just in life. Um, anyway, the long and the short of it is he didn't sanction me. And after the verdicts, I made an agreement that I would withdraw from the case after a certain period of time just because to make everyone happy. But after the verdict, the big verdict, I showed up in his courtroom and Monsanto said, okay, Mr. Wisner has to go now. And the judge said, nah, I've changed my mind. He's one of the best lawyers I've ever had. He's staying. And so that was the Monsanto papers. It was a group of papers that have been used by academics. Books have been published on it, documentaries made, thousands of articles have been written about it, showing and exposing the fraud. And it only came to light because I put my career on the line to get him out. So
Sometimes that's what it takes, right? When you ring the bell.
Yeah. A lot of people listen when you ring the bell, and sometimes it's not everybody you want listening. But yeah, it was tough. I mean, it was a tough time, and it worked out for the better, right? Most of these stories end in disaster and career ends, right? I happened to win enough and to maneuver this enough that I was able to get my clients money and be very successful as an attorney. But I'll tell you, man, it's tough, and it shouldn't be that tough. It shouldn't be that you have to have a once in a generation success to ring the bell. It should be easier than that. And that's a testament to the problems of our judiciary, but that's probably for another podcast. I won't bother you here today.
But again, maybe you've just opened the window of possibility for others, right?
I'll tell you,
Maybe you've given permission to many others to stand up and ring the bell.
I'll tell you, I go to a lot of conferences and stuff as an attorney. And I would say at least 4 or 5 times at every conference. Just last week, I was in New York at one, and a guy comes up to me and says, "Hey, Mr. Wisner, you don't know me, whatever," and gave me his name. He's like, "I just want you to know the work you did in Monsanto inspired me to get into law. My father got sick from cancer, and I'm doing a whole litigation to expose this chemical plant down the street. And the work you did and Into the Weeds documentary, it literally is my inspiration. I just really want to shake your hand." And I'm like, go get him, man. Let's do it. I love it. This is exactly what I want to hear. Like, this is exactly the kind of passion and commitment to social justice that if I can inspire one person to do that, man, we can change the world. So that is very heartening. It warms, it lifts my heart, and it gives me the energy to keep doing this, because sometimes I just want to just call it a day and just, go write children's books or something. I don't know. Do something else.
I look forward to the Brent Wisner children's book. I think maybe just in the sense of where you came to then, and as a beautiful closing reflection, obviously for you to do what you do, it takes more than just ambition. Maybe if you can speak to us about what gives you hope and what gets you up every morning. Like there's a sense in you, there's a fire in you that is, that you have some superhuman qualities, I think. So I'd love for you to share with our audience about, and just to end on an inspirational note, what is it that gets you out of bed in the morning and keeps you doing this work, mate? And, and leave us with the sense of hope, because I think we all need one.
Yeah. I mean, it's a tough question. And I think it's the question that we all ask ourselves every morning. I'll tell you this. For me, what drives me to maniacal amounts of work, to putting my physical well-being sometimes behind the well-being of other people, is the belief. No, it's not the belief. The knowingness that we can make a difference. I've seen the light go off in people, whether it's a client, whether it's a judge, whether it's a jury. And when that light goes off, it doesn't turn off, right? It goes on. And if we can inspire one person, just one, we've won. Because if we all do that, right, the world's forever changed. And we don't need to convince every person on every end of the political spectrum. We just have to convince a motivated group of people to make a difference. And if we do that, there's almost nothing we can't do. And so what gets me going in the morning is the knowingness that those people exist, and that when I meet them, I have that community that I need to keep going. And people ask me, why do I practice law every day? I could retire or whatever. I do it because I care about the people that are in this fight with me. We have the Margaret Mead quote front and center at the beginning of my office when you walk in. That's what motivates us. And it's not a platitude. It's really what drives us. And I think you do that well enough, no matter in whatever work you're doing, whether law, whether it be agriculture, whether it be as a homebound spouse, whatever it is, you do that with that commitment, we can change the world. So
I have no doubt and full agreement on my side. The traditions have always said, and especially at this time for humanity, the change will come from us, not from an individual. We can do it, but we've got to do it together.
Yeah.
And I'm certainly glad that I'm on the same side of the fence of you, Brett.
Yeah.
And
you don't want to be on the other end of a cross-examination. That's true. I can be pretty nasty.
And I just want to say thank you for sharing time with us, with our audience.
Absolutely.
Thank you for tolling the bell. You've reminded us that it takes what humanity needs to do and what we individually need to do to come back into relationship, and what's possible when we are courageous and brave, and look forward to hearing more of your work and supporting your work, and hoping that the collective can see the incredible things that you've done, and you can inspire change somewhat in them, mate. And I really appreciate just sitting with you and sharing these stories.
Yeah.
And you've been listening to the Invisible Ingredient podcast to the esteemed Brent Wisner. Thank you again.
Thank you so much for having me, Blair. I really appreciate it, man.
Thank you, Brent, for your tireless pursuit of justice and truth. Your work reminds us that the invisible ingredient in our food is not only the chemical itself, but the systems of law, governance, and accountability that either protect us or fail us. This is the Invisible Ingredient, brought to you by Farmer's Footprint. Thanks for listening.